Somebody give me a thumbs up.
Yes, thank you.
Right, super, thank you very much. So can I just remind members that following this morning's meeting, there will be a transformation presentation. So after a short break, can members please return to the lateral room for the presentation? The agenda pack with papers is available via mod.gov or directly from the council website. When you're invited to speak, could you please state clearly who you are for the benefit of anybody who is listening to the meeting so they can identify who is speaking, and please also ensure that you use the microphones if you are in the room and try and have them as near to you as possible. The meeting will be audio recorded by the council, and as agendas are now viewed electronically by most people, please, members and officers, would you refer to the page numbers from the published agenda pack to assist everyone present in finding the appropriate information. We are not expecting a fire alarm today, but should this happen, please follow the Democratic Services officers and they will lead the way out. Are there any apologies for absence, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee. We have received apologies for absence from Councillor Lovell, for whom Councillor Cravis is substituting. We've also received apologies from Councillor Seeb and I'm just sorry, Chair, just bear with me. Councillors Murphy and Mansell from the committee are online.
And Councillor Osborne as well, I think is online. Yes, good. Right, thank you very much. Councillor Trimnell.
Councillor Ham as well.
Yes,
he's not able to make it today.
Yes, indeed, you're absolutely right. He has a difficulty, I think, with a leg infection, so he's quite unwell at the moment.
Yeah. What were you saying about Osborne?
She's online. But she's not on the committee. She's not. I was just referring. I was just referring to people that were online. Good. Thank you very much. Declarations of interest, if any, please. Oh, Councillor Seeb. Well, there. Good. So the minutes of the previous meetings have been circulated. That's the 28th of April and the 28th of May. May I take them as a true record, please? Are there any matters arising from them that anybody wishes to refer to, either in the 28th of April minutes or the 28th of May minutes? No. Right. Item 4 is public question time, and this morning, unusually, we have no questions from members of the public. So we will move straight then, if we may, to agenda item 5, which is the General Fund Revenue and Capital Budget Monitoring Report out to turn for the end of March 2025. Councillor Lation is here. Councillor Lation, do you wish to introduce this item?
Thank you, Chair. If I could just introduce by saying that the report is clearly good news in the way that we are protecting reserves quite considerably, but that we have no room for complacency at all. As long as we are using one-off monies through capitalisation directive or flexible use of capital receipts, then it's very clear that as a council we are not yet what's a term that's usually used is out of the woods. So there is no room for complacency for us. As we move into the next year, of course, once we get to the month 2 report and then the quarter 1 report, that will be really interesting for us and a key moment, I think, in how we look to the future and how well we are still keeping that tight focus on everything financial at this council. So if I may, Chair, I'd like to hand us over to our acting 151 Officer, Nicola Hicks. Thank you.
Officer Hicks, would you present the report, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Councillor Lation. So as Councillor Lation's highlighted, it is a positive report that we're presenting today for the outturn for 24-25. On the first page of the report, page 27, paragraph 2, the report shows there that when we set the budget back in February 2024, we were expecting a reliance of 36.8 from reserves. So that was the amount we were going to transfer from reserves, and the use of the capitalisation directive of 36.8 million. Little confusing that they're similar figures, but those were the figures. What we've actually used, you will see in this report, is actually 665 £1,000 from reserves. So quite a significant shift there in what was forecast at the time to what's actually the position at outturn. So as we say, a positive movement there. We've reported through our monthly reporting to Scrutiny and the executives why we've had this movement. But I think what we've found is actually the movement from month 11 was 5.5 million shift in a positive movement in terms of that less draw from reserve, but quite a significant movement in month 11. So we've highlighted these in paragraph 6, just so members can see that actually it's not one particular service where that underspend come from. It was across the board in terms of those services. I think there's some positive movements that I feel we could have forecast in month 11. So I will work with the team and how they work with the services in terms of making sure we are forecasting accurately. I think throughout we always said that we would capitalise through the use of the flexible use of capital receipts policy anything that we could in relation to transformation costs that we incurred during 24-25, and we made that movement there. That obviously protects our revenue expenditure and pushes the expenditure to capital. So that was done. And also there's some year-end adjustments and movements that will happen as the close down team, the corporate team, produce those financial statements. They obviously do checks as they go along in terms of what's happened throughout the year, and they will move things about between capital and revenue, but also doing those accounting adjustments to make sure we're accounting for things in the right way to make us compliant with the CIPFA code. Table 1, which is at the top of page 31, shows the movements there in terms of the services, with the RAG status there in terms of green and red, and there's kind of no major swing against any one service from that was reported in month 11. At the bottom of that table, you will see there were really clearly at the bottom of that table showed the use of reserves there and the capitalisation directive. So the outturn report has been produced using full use of that capitalisation directive that was required from government, and that's why we were able to reduce our draw on reserves. So MHCLG, through discussions with myself and my current deputy, who's acting with me, we've had discussions with MHCLG about that approach, and they are comfortable. They're taking that back to ministers at the minute just to say that's what Somerset plan to do and have done, and therefore just getting that ratified by them. What we're also doing is they are waiting for us to provide this outturn report as approved and noted by members, and also they're waiting for our financial statements to be published, our draft ones, which are due to be published on Monday. So very hectic weekend ahead. Just in terms of point 12, so point 11 just runs through those changes, as I've said. Point 12 there in terms of the dedicated schools grant. The final position was a decrease of 664k on that we'd forecast. That said, we're still reporting a final overspend of 28 million there on our DSG, so that's added to the previous deficit that we had. I think Appendix C on the dedicated schools grant is a really good appendix to detail out why we've got that different breakdown there in terms of, I don't know if members want to flick to it now, but on page 61 of your pack, which is Appendix C, there is really set out really clearly in terms of the different elements of the dedicated schools grant. And actually you can see on the first page that largely the overspend relates to high needs. And there's a paragraph there that talks about why we've got those pressures on the high needs block in terms of low inflationary increases on the school's funding, the pressures that are put on the school's budget in relation to inflation and with pupil numbers, demand on complexity of need, and also that the lack of appropriate state funded places are driving the use of more high costed independent non-maintained schools. So I think it's really important that members note that just in terms of what is driving that that deficit there. And the table on page 62 goes down, breaking that down just so for a bit more clarity in terms of that overspend. If we go back to the main body of the report, so 1 second while I just find my page. Just wanted to take members to, sorry, my mouse got a bit happy. The MTFP, the outturn, so page, if we go back to page 34, the MTFP savings outturn there. So previously you would have seen in the reports coming through Scrutiny Executive that we had achieved, and we had others like to be achieved in terms of other descriptors there are the ones that were on track at risk. For outturn, we've obviously either got it's been achieved or it's unachieved. Because of our outturn position, despite those savings there in the unachieved of the 4.376 million, Services have managed to mitigate the non-achievement of that saving in this financial year. So they've had other funds that could cover that, or other things they've done to try and mitigate that. Unfortunately, that because it's a one-off mitigation, though, that saving and the achievement of that saving will be followed through and carried forward into the next financial year. So they'll have that there again this year. Then they need to achieve that saving. If they can't, they need to mitigate it, or they need to find an alternative saving they could put forward to get that saving amended. So just wanted to clarify that, because I think it's caused some confusion about the unachievement of savings and whether they'll be carried forward or not, and Services feeling like they've mitigated them. So why are they still having to find that saving in this financial year? And it's because it was one off. So it's not a permanent movement in a budget there. If we just go down to points 19 and 20, we talk about EFS and capitalisation directive. So that just confirms there what I've just said around the use of the capitalisation directive in the accounts. And also what you'll see in point 20 there is actually MHCLG approved that we could use 40 million to fund our transformation and redundancy costs, of which we've only actually spent 7.882 million of that 40 million, just because of the timing of some of the transformation activities and not spending that as we'd originally forecast. Previously, when we set this current year in February, or actually in March 25, when we set the budget, our previous 151 made a request to MHCLG that of that 40 million, we carried forward 20 million because we could already see that we weren't going to spend that 40 million. What I've also done now is I've made a request to MHCLG to carry forward the additional 12.118. So we retain our overall umbrella of 40 million. We're just only spending the 7.882 million for previous financial year, and we will spend the remainder this financial year. And that's in the mix of the discussion they're having with ministers to get that approved, but we're working on that basis at the moment. The table 3 at the top of page 36 shows the flexible use of capital receipts and the capitalisation directive in terms of that transformation funding there. It shows the outturn position and the variance, and that ties back with what I've just said around that request to MHCLG to carry that forward. Just in terms of the collection fund, slightly, very marginally, which is a little frustrating, but 96.75, I'm sure you'll agree, is just marginally off 96.78. So if we only reported to one decimal place, it may have showed, and I think we previously spoke about the income management system affecting that collection rate there. But I have been assured that in 25-26 we are back up to our normal collection rate, and we are hitting target, which you'll see when you receive the first report for 25-26. In terms of spend control board, you'll see in points 26 and 27 we did see an increase in supplier payments going out. That's not unusual, especially in a Q4 period where all the suppliers realise they've got to get their invoices in to get paid for any work. So I'm not alarmed by that increase there. I think going forward, as we look at a different approach to the spend control board, we're going to look at what we're reporting through our our monthly or quarterly reporting to executive and scrutiny in terms of what the information we include in there. So we're going to start looking more towards compliance and people making sure services are complying to the no order, no pay policy, making sure they are compliant to the financial regs in terms of payments going out. So we're going to start reporting that and the work that we're doing with services to increase their compliance and addressing issues that are we find. Just in terms of the capital budget there, there's a summary page on page 39 at the top there, shows the comparison of month 11 budget to outturn. So you'll see largely the variance that's in the last column largely relates to the capitalisation and capitalised transformation costs there, largely account to the movement of why that budget shifted and why that spend shifted as we took stuff out of revenue and we put it into capital there. As we go down to table 6, which is on page 40, you'll see that actually of the capital programme, there's going to be a movement of removing 697k from the capital programme where underspends have been delivered against some of our schemes, and therefore that funding can be removed from the capital programme, and either members can then, if it's funding there, they could choose to use it on a different project, but the likelihood is that will be a reduction in our borrowing costs in terms of the money we've borrowed. Externally funded additions there on point 40 at the bottom of page 40. There's just some movements there in terms of things we've added to the programme. Again, these are not increasing the cost of the overall capital programme. These movements are allowed to be decided by executive because they're either externally funded or there's money coming from revenue. It's not additional borrowing for the council. Table 7, the financing of the capital programme, on page 41, actually shows of the outturn position of 188.3 million, only 30.3 million of that was actually borrowing. So you'll see the majority of our spend that we are doing is either through grant and contribution, which is the bulk of it at 94, capital receipts, and revenue and reserves. So good position in terms of you're not a council that is funding its capital programme 100% through borrowing. There's more information on the capital schemes in appendices P to R, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Officer Hicks. Super. So the first person to catch my eye is Councillor Trimnell and then Councillor Hophouse. So Trimnell.
Thank you, Chair. So some of my questions have been answered, actually. So I wanted to know on page 35, so if I go back to page 35, it says that we borrowed, or we didn't borrow, but we took a capitalisation directive of 40 million. The eligible spend was 18.877. What does that mean? What's the difference between the eligible spend and what we can't spend? Does that mean that the rest had to go into a capital budget?
Apologies, microphone not on. So the spend there for 40 million is what we profiled, that we are going to spend that through our capital receipts. So this is why we are selling assets in order to fund our transformation activities and other activities that can be funded through the flexible use of capital receipts. But it's very specific what you can fund through that, because there's a specific policy on that. We have a policy that's set as part of our budget papers in terms of what we can spend, and that is monitored by government in terms of us using that policy.
Sorry, I have got more questions as well, but so that makes sense. So in other words, although we sold £40 million worth, we couldn't actually spend 40 million on the day-to-day spending that we were planning to make.
Yeah, so you can't ordinarily, if you have a capital receipt, you can't use capital money on revenue activity unless you have a specific policy in place where you have authority to do that under the flexible use of capital receipts policy, but it has to deliver transformation activity.
Okay, so that makes sense. I'd assumed that if we had a capitalisation directive, then we could use all of the money that we took from selling capital to help us with the budget. So that makes sense. So another question that I've got is the council tax that collected. So I noticed at first, I thought that we had, oh God, I can't see the numbers now, but I thought we had a lot more owed to us from this year. But actually, when you look at the table, and I'm losing my page numbers now, on page 126 as well, it seems to say it's 46.1 million, but actually that's accumulated arrears over multiple years, I presume from districts as well.
That is a cumulative figure, yeah. So we have debt going back a number of years. So there's two things that are happening on that. One is sometimes we can take a case to court, and the court will instruct us that we are to accept £10 a week against that. What that means on our systems is that debt has to remain there because that agreement has been reached by the court, and actually then we can't do anything about that because that's the court instruction. So that will remain there, and that's why we have debts going back many years, because their debt may go back that far and therefore they're paying £10 a week, and so we have to accept it. The other thing is, I think in terms of write-offs, I'm not sure that all of the districts were very good at keeping on top of their write-offs of debt that was deemed unrecoverable. As part of the consolidation of the revs and bends systems that's being undertaken at the moment, we are seeing more of that clearing of the system to get rid of some of that legacy debt that we know is irrecoverable.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. So basically, there's a fair chunk of that we may never get back. And this isn't about council tax, but it's just mentioned in there. But I'd be really interested at some point. I think we spoke about having a briefing at some point about the collection of council tax. And I think that would be really helpful to sort of answer some other questions I've got that probably aren't for now. So how do we know in 25-26 that we're up to our normal collection rate? Because I would have thought you'd only know that looking back on a year, whether you'd collected the amount you expected to or not. So how do we know it's going to be better this year?
It's actually monitored on a weekly basis. So the team are already monitoring that. And actually, as we once we have all of it on one system, that monitoring of that and the performance indicators that we'll be able to produce as a team will be will be much more enhanced in terms of understanding kind of the range of debt we've got, the types, the turnover of how they're doing, processing claims, dealing with house moves, all of that sort of thing will be much more streamlined in terms of our reporting on that. But yeah, they already know from the work they've done that collection is back up to the target of where it should be, and that's around us doing a bit of monitoring to produce some data around the effects of the council tax reduction scheme changes that have been put in place to see whether we are actually seeing increased debt.
Okay, because obviously as this year goes on, we're possibly likely to see people struggling more and more because of the cost of living and all of the issues. Businesses as well, business rates that you're expecting to collect may fall if businesses go out of business and you can't collect those rates. So
So you may recall from when we set the council tax rate, it's not just we're the collecting agency on behalf of town and parish council precepts, even in Somerset Police, the fire authority. So we collect, but we actually keep.
yeah, That makes sense.
Okay,
Thank you.
Lucy, I hate to interrupt. Are you done? Good. Thank you very much. No, very interesting series of questions. Thank you. And the point about the collection of council tax briefing is one that I think we can log. So thank you very much for that. Councillor Hophouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a good report, but I find it very convoluted, and paragraph 3 on page 27 actually states why I think we should have had 2 reports, because the month 11 overspend has been put in with the run up for the total savings for the year, and it hasn't made it clear that we've actually saved £35 million on the budget. It just ends with the final overspend of 0.665, which will be funded for reserves, which is the situation because we were originally going to use 36 million from reserves, and we are 35 million down on our total predicted spend. I think this would have been a better report if it had been split in 2 and we'd had the month 11 not put in with the overall situation. It is a very good report. It just doesn't make it clear for me that we actually have saved what is a large amount of money on the overall. If we go to page 32, you talk about the training gear, children's services overspend, and the situation with the I can't remember it's the grant thing. I wish just to make it clear to everybody that on Friday the government announced that it was going to slip the payment back of the DSE grant to 28, and that we wouldn't be in a position of going into 114 in this April, because the dedicated schools grant will not need to be paid back until 28, when it will be enormous. The other thing I wanted to talk about, which not necessarily budget related, is the fact that our care homes and our children's external placements are being bought up willy-nilly by financial services. So in Castle Carey, I have one of every type of care home. Both of the big care homes are now owned by financial services who are aiming to make as much money as they can, and the same applies to children's services. Now, in the 25-26 budget, how are you taking account of that? Because Chiltern Council, I understand, is now £100,000 per year per child, and the same applies to the upgrade that's happening in the care homes in my division. Are we going to be able to either reset up our own care homes as we had in Somerset Care, or are we, what are we going to be doing about the children services on external placements? And I understand that we need a lot more fostering, if that makes sense.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hophouse. Do you want to respond to any of that at the moment?
I would.
Nicola? And then
Please.
I'll ask Councillor Shearer to come in as well.
Okay, I'll go first, and I'll let Liz come in. So traditionally, I guess an underspend I would see that happened if you had a true underspend at the end of the financial year. You would be saying we're able to increase our reserves because we've had an underspend in what we forecast to use. We were in a slightly different position, because actually what we were saying is we didn't have enough money to fund what we needed for our budget. Therefore, it's not a true underspend. It's a saving on an overspend. So it's not set us in a better position financially in terms of we've got that money available to spend on other things. What it's meant is we've protected our use of reserves by not having to go into that. So it's a bit like you haven't got, if you think about it in your day-to-day expenditure, you haven't got enough money in your account to pay your daily bills, so you're going to use your credit card. Actually, one of your daily bills comes in less than you think, and you don't have to use your credit card. If you think of that in that analogy, saving on protecting it. So I think it's right how it's presented here because it's not a true underspend.
Come back quickly and then I'll go to bed.
Did the budget include those use of reserves? Yes or no?
They did.
Therefore, we have saved on our budget £35 million. You can't argue it, even if we don't use the reserves to fill the budget.
Yeah, but I think it's just important how you present it that we were using those reserves and now we haven't. So yes, I'll take your point. In terms of the DSG override, yes, it was, for me, marginally good news that they've extended the override. We need government to find a longer term solution. They can't just keep extending the override. It does mean that we don't have to issue a 114 because that statutory override's not coming off and therefore it's coming onto our balance sheet. But members have to remember for every pound we're spending on DSG and deficit, we're having to find that money to pay. So it is costing the authority in terms of money we haven't got in the bank because we're funding that deficit. So I think we would like to see a lot more movement from government on this because actually as our deficit increases, this is where we're still stacking up a huge problem for future years. And that's why the importance of the deficit management plan coming forward to see what we can do as authority ourselves to help mitigate or control some of that spend. But the government still need to come up with a longer term solution to this or put more money into special educational needs, especially. But I'll let Liz come in. I'm not going to attempt to answer your question on the social care homes. I think that's more service specific and one for perhaps the children's and adult scrutinies.
Thank you very much. Councillor Shearer.
Thank you so much, and that's why I'm always glad to be in the room for these ones because it is helpful. But I will say that Nicola Hicks has a remarkable grasp on what's going on within the service and within the finance. So I'm really grateful for that. I would have just said exactly as Nicola has said about the DSG. It is a temporary reprieve which will help some councils and not others. It's probably the least any government could have done would have been to extend that statutory override. It does not take any of the pressure off us to find a deficit management plan that will actually work. Even if somebody had magicked away the £5 billion worth of debt that's accumulating across councils across the country, those debts would start accumulating from month one. So there's the two issues, one about how we manage that accumulating debt and one how we try and get rid of it in terms of we reduce the need for it. So, but Nicola's got that all covered off and thank you. On the homes, we all recognise it's a national issue, which we all recognise has trailed very heavily in the press, and we can see those. Not all privately owned homes, residential homes, are financially aggressive or market aggressive, but some are. And you can see some snapping at heels and people seeing pound signs and thinking that's a great way to make both own an asset and have an income from it at the same time. It is nationally recognised. So what we're doing from a children's point of view, I can't talk for adults, they have a different model. But for children's, we're already doing the Homes and Horizons project, which is destabilising the market somewhat. We're bringing our own homes online. We're looking at our 9th now. So that's working really well. But that is only helping the very top, most complex set of children that we have, if you like, and trying to bring our children home from being outside of county. So we have more to do, but so we're always constantly looking at ways in which we can see ways of disrupting the market. But the two main things we are doing, you mentioned some of them. One is we have a business plan which we're working with our financial colleagues about around improving our reunification of it. It's a hideous phrase, but that wraparound of support where we work to get children back out of residential and back into homes with their families. So we've got that business plan in place to do that. So over time, and it would take time, we could more easily ensure when children go back home, they can be kept at home happily. And the other one is around our fostering business case, because again, some but not all of the children coming into our care would actually do very well in a foster home. And some of our children who are in residential would have been able to go into fostering if there'd been fostering available at the time. So we are working on those things. And certainly, Nicola would put me right on this one, but we have, I think our budget this year, 25-26, is reflecting the fact that we're anticipating more children in our care. So we've had at least 40 children come through into our care over the last year or so, more than we had. The appendix, forgive me, my my ModGov is not working, so I'm doing everything off the public one. So my page numbers aren't the same as yours, but in Appendix B, I think it is the first appendix on children's, there is a graph that shows how many children are now in our care. And at the time of writing, that was 627. So that was at least 30 up from this time last year. So we are reflecting that there in the budget. And I think Nicola would confirm the numbers and the modelling and the projections are higher than they were last year.
I can confirm that they are higher than they were in the prior year, but as you will see when you receive the month 2 report, the numbers of children in care are higher than we predicted at this current time.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Seeb.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of awkward technical questions about the collection of council tax arrears. And I may be well out of date on my understanding because I've not been very close to this year. Looking at the table on page 126, bottom of page 126, we differentiate the debt which is 6 years or older. My recollection is that there was a regulation that stops us getting a court order for the payments of council tax arrears once 6 years were up. Is that still the case? And does the figure here represent the total of all unpaid tax or the tax which is due to be paid under some arrangement in that 6 years or older row? The second question related to that is, it looks to me as though whilst we have collected £1 million, the outstanding amount for this year is increased £1 million on last year. Actually, the difference between the target collection that we had set out within the budget and the actual collection which has been performed is only around, I think it's around £146,000. So it's noise, that second decimal place in terms of effect on the council. And also that the increase in total arrears in the table appears to mainly be £800,000, which was owed last year as 5-year-old debt and is now owed this year as 6-year-old debt, and it's a legacy that's caused the increase. So yes, we've missed our target, but by a hair's breadth in cash terms. And does the 6 years or older include the debt which is unrecoverable, or is it the recoverable figure 10.8 million? Thank you.
So you've asked a technical question as your first question there that actually I don't know the answer to. So that's testing my knowledge. So I've done a phone a friend and I will circulate the answer when I get that one. Just in terms of debt in those appendices, that it does show all debt. So it will still show, because at any point in time, even if those people who have an arrangement to pay, they can stop. So we do need to do our monitoring on the total amount of debt outstanding.
Yes, so if I could come back, that really was the crux of my point. I think if we get beyond 6 years and there is a risk of not being able to actually get a further court order, shouldn't we be considering writing that off? I know it's unhelpful, but I would want it in the written off early so I can see my true cash position.
Yes, and that's the approach we are taking as we do that system consolidation piece to cleanse our data. And I'm having many conversations at the minute with the team around kind of making decisions on the recovery of some of the legacy debt, and actually because I have in my role to sign off the write-offs up to a certain value. If they're over a certain value, they go up to committee, as you would have seen. So I think, yeah, that's why I really want to cleanse the data and make sure that we try to have a collectible debt on there. But I think the important thing is that we must endeavour that we are collecting as much of that debt as possible.
if I could just make a final observation, I think, the committee needs to recognise that lots of that debt dates back to previous councils and indeed previous councils. So the situation hasn't been caused or set by this one. It is a proper legacy. It'll only wash out in another 5 years' time, 6 years' time.
Either by this one or its immediate predecessor.
Yeah, and if helpful, we can include going forward the debt profile per year. I don't think it's helpful to go back into legacy districts in terms of where the debt came from, but I'm happy to look at the financial years. So actually, my phone a friend actually did just come through, so that works quite well. The answer was that we can only take them to court if there was a liability order in place. If they're not, the court won't grant permission. So you're correct in what you were thinking.
Surely good, thank you. Councillor Filmer.
Thanks, Jack. A couple of ones if I can. Start off with that, I think, typo on page 29. The recommendations, A, overspend is an increase of 0.655. I think you mentioned in your report that actually it's 5.5 million. That was the change, but that one obviously for the next report that probably just needs to be updated.
Well spotted.
No worries. The second thing was page 31. I did read in the report, but I still don't understand the business rates where there is the underachievement of approximately 500,000, but our collection rate is higher. It does say elsewhere in the report how that is worked out, but I still didn't understand it. So I wondered if you could do it in words of one syllable as to how we've got that 500,000.
Yeah, in plain English. So these are two different things. The collection rate is what we're collecting off of customers. This overspend is in relation to when we built the budget, we looked at the amalgamation of all of the district budgets that have been put together, and we felt that we had accounted for grant coming in, and we had 500,000 too much that we could give up. But what also happened, that was the case that we could give up, but the corporate team accounted for that centrally, so we've ended up with it in there as a duplicate.
Thank you very much. The other question I wanted to ask was, and again, you touched on it, the redundancy monies, which in effect we haven't spent this year, but we've rolled forward. Is that, so in effect, we're saying that those are redundancies that we've already made. We will be paying that in this financial year. We just didn't pay it in last financial year. That was the page 35.
So I think there's two things here. So when we did the original calculations for what we may need as a redundancy figure, that was a significantly higher than what's actually happened in reality in terms of the workforce reduction. So a lot of the reduction was done through vacant posts or moving people about. So actually the amount of people who took voluntary or compulsory redundancy was actually significantly less than we originally forecast. That said, the 40 million wasn't all put forward for redundancy payments. It was put forward for transformation activities, an element of which was redundancy to right size the organisation to allow us to then work differently and do some transformation. So the redundancies have been dealt with effectively because we dealt with that, and because you have to account for it as soon as someone accepts the redundancy and we've agreed it gets accounted for in that financial year, and the new structure got put in place from the 1st of April. So I don't feel there's any monies of that to go out on redundancies. That money will be for transformation activity.
Excellent, thank you very much. And the last one I was going to ask was just it's something I've raised before, but it's relating to chart 3 and other similar charts. It's page 38. In previous occasions, we've asked if it was possible to have some sort of comparative on those graphs as to it's all well and good us looking at the overall debt value as a 1 year thing, but if we had a comparative of what it was maybe the previous year, we can get a better view as to where we're heading, because obviously it covers the whole year and shows the movements, but there's movement of debt throughout any financial year, so it would just be useful to have that comparative included, I think.
Yeah, I think there's been a bit of confusion with the team, because I think because the chart, if you take chart 3 for example on page 38, the graphic, the chart, the x-axis at the bottom actually goes from December 23 through to March 25, so it's more than one financial year. But I see what you're saying, it would be easier graphically if we actually showed it as 2 separate lines on the chart. So I'll take that back to the team.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Johnson, Vice Chairman.
Thank you. And thank you very much for the report. I was just curious on page 28, where you list out the overspends by service, the underspends by services. The two with the largest figures for underspend were community services and strategy, workforce and localities, both of which mention staff vacancies and staffing costs. I was just wondering, do we have a breakdown as to what proportion they were of those service underspends? And also just curious as to how much of that is going forward in terms of staff vacancies. Thank you.
So I'm just going to look, because actually if you go into the appendices for each of those areas, so if you go into Appendix D for community services, there is actually a further breakdown in there in terms of it breaks it down. So it talks about kind of the leisure sports centre underspends, which and breaks it down into that being, if you look at page 70, for example, that says there about leisure sports centre. That was an increase of 589 million. Library services, 422, which was an increase of 4.21. So I think it's all broken down in those appendices.
But that doesn't sort of break it down in terms of whether it's staff or services, does it particularly?
So it does say in there that around largely due to underspend. So if it's largely, that means I would take that as the proportion of that underspend is salary related. But what you have to remember is we would see a large proportion of underspend related to salaries in 24-25 because people were holding vacancies. And when that new structure went in, we would now have taken £34 million worth of salary related costs out of the budget. So we will see that. So in relation to your question, to answer your question, I don't think you will see the same level of vacancies going forward into this financial year because of that restructure. We've taken a lot of the vacant posts, and where those services have now got vacant posts, they are trying to recruit to those posts.
Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Chair. So just to complete that as well, members of Scrutiny will remember as part of our medium-term financial strategy, one of the activities was around reviewing the outturn position. So now this has been completed, that's one of the key activities. So I would absolutely concur with Nikki's view that effectively we won't see the same level of staffing savings that we saw in last year because a number of vacancies were being held. However, the assessment of that will be completed as medium-term financial strategy to ensure that we are absolutely clear whether there are any contributions that go into this year. To answer that question, Councillor Johnson.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Cravitz.
Thank you, Chair. I'll put that way actually. Yeah, excellent report. I think we got up to Appendix R. I wonder what happens when we get to Appendix Z. And I'm glad I printed it out at work, because if I printed it out at home, I think I would have got told off for using someone's ink. But it is generally one of those reports I think I might keep and refer back to at times. So I thought from that point of view, excellent. And obviously bear in mind I'm subbing for this committee. It's a couple of, I had loads of questions, to be honest. I think I'll start with, don't know whether I want to list them all off and then or list a couple and come back. I think my first one I had was, and it was a really small item, someone said, was spending control. Anything over £100 has to be authorised in a certain way. And I was thinking, well, it's been £100 for a couple of years now, so that's probably equivalent to £80. And you know, it costs you £80 for two of you to go and get a decent curry nowadays. And I wonder if I work that back to my business, it's probably the equivalent of one of my staff asking if they can spend half a pence. Maybe not, it's probably even less, I should think. So I wonder at what point does that get reviewed? And then actually is, you know, I appreciate every little bit helps, but at what point does that get reviewed? And at what point does that actually become a hindrance that actually is costing us money to do? I think that's one little question there. The no order, no pay thing that I saw there was, again, does this have an adverse effect on our smaller suppliers? And do we feel, does that actually get broken very often? Again, is that actually costing us money? And then I think I should declare an interest here when it talks about historical debt at times. I mean, I think you could go back to council before the last council when it comes to some councils, but at what point does, and I think this was touched on by Councillor Seaman and probably Tribunal, at what point does the cost of sending the bailiffs in or trying to do that actually become a hindrance and not particularly helpful? And, you know, do we feel the other problem I have is if you put pressure on certain departments for savings, etc., that then they start acting in a way they might not have acted. And you know, I hate to, you know, speaking to various people, it's always a touchy subject, business rates and council tax. But obviously now with business rates, we've got a reduction in some of the relief that we've had. As do we envisage this becoming a problem going forward? Because suddenly business rates, well, not nice time, but it's been suddenly there's been a bit of an increase, which is probably taking people by surprise, even though they should know better and know and then the budgets, and we talk about savings, and they talk there's cutting corners. How do we ensure that these are savings and going another services, you talk about then staffing. Obviously you have if the departments are working on an extremely tight budget, what happens when something out somehow a few people go ill and suddenly you either need agency staff or you're certainly not providing a service. How do we build in that? And how do we build that into the budget that there will be X amount, which is and how do we ensure that the service isn't then detrimenting our customers, for want of a better word? Particularly think about, I don't know, planning would be one, I suppose, but actually planning people could wait, but you talk about housing and things. Well, actually, if someone's housing officer is off sick and there's no one picking up their work, what happens then? And then if we're not bringing agency staff, you know, if we are bringing agency staff, how much extra is that costing and who makes that decision? And I have one final one, if you can bear with me, Chair. There was a lot of talk about the capitalisation directive, and I sort of understand that. And we've been doing that for a long time and talking about it for a long time. And sorry to throw this in, but we talk about we look at these budgets over 5 years, I suppose. What happens when we run out of stuff to sell? There will be a point where, I have a little pinball collection that I've been selling. Eventually I'll run out of them to sell. So I better think of a plan for when I do. What's the council's plan for when, long term, when there isn't actually anything else to sell? Do we have one?
Right, thank you. A series of very interesting questions there from Councillor Cravis.
That's a lot of questions on a range of subjects, so I'll try and do my best to answer them in general, and then we can pick up any. So I'm very cautious about answering some questions into relation to when is a debt not cost effective to get a bailiff in, because from a public perception point of view, we need to be careful about what we say and our internal policies are on that. So I think some of those questions around when is it not cost effective and actually kind of the hindrance of bailiffs and all of that, if we could save that to the briefing, if we make it about council tax, business rates and kind of that for members, I would prefer to do that rather than answering that in a public meeting, if that's okay. Just in terms of business rates, one thing that we are worried about with the 26-27 budget is not just the change in reliefs that we've had, is actually the business rates reset that the government is proposing to do. So that could see a significant effect on this council in terms of the growth that we've got in business rates. Us losing that growth, and we don't have any modelling on that we've made a couple of assumptions in our budget at the moment, but we are particularly worried about the effect of that on this council. Because if they take away all of the growth that we've got in one financial year, that could have a significant effect and increase the budget gap that we are currently facing for next year. But in terms of the reliefs, yes, we monitor kind of the effect and of losing some business rate income, and we do modelling for bad debt, so we do make some assumptions for how much we do, and we get external help from that in terms of them looking at what our profile has been over the years, other external factors that may contribute to that, what's happening in the market sector, what our portfolio looks like in terms of what type of businesses that we've got and where our money comes from. So we do get some external support for that, but yes, it's an important factor in terms of modelling that. In terms of the spend control board, you are right in terms of the £100 limit on that was needed at that point in time when we declared the financial emergency. As time has gone on, that board has created a very mixed feeling across the organisation in terms of people feeling like they can't get on and do things. There's a slowness in the process. Actually, it became quite admin intensive in terms of it going through that board and then it getting stuck in that board and then supplies and services being delayed. It was having a detrimental effect. So we're doing a lot of work at the minute to revise the terms of reference for spend control, I will call it. So what we're not going to do is we're not going to have a board, we're going to have a process in place to get spend authorised, and that's in conjunction with our procurement team, where they will hold a lot of the cards in terms of making sure that when spend is going through that contract is in place and therefore not delaying then that order being created. Appreciate what you're saying about the fact that we have to have an order number may put a lot of smaller suppliers off. We do have some exemptions in place, but it shouldn't be an onerous problem to get an order number. And I would encourage all of the services to go down the order related activity, because that actually means that that supplier gets paid quicker. There is evidence to show that where an order is in place, the payment goes quicker through our system, because as soon as that is marked as being received, if that invoice comes in, it has the proper order number quoted on it, it will be automatically matched for payment and go out. So I would encourage the orders, and that's where we're changing the terms of reference of the board to work with services around compliance to the no order, no pay, and also about kind of why doesn't our order flow system work for some services and how we can get that working better and integrated with their systems so it's not so onerous. So taking away some of the admin burden. Just in terms of savings, cutting corners, and just in terms of staff vacancies and agencies, we don't put anything into the budget as a saving unless we believe it is robust. So unless the service have filled in a savings form and the finance team have assessed it as being robust. That said, obviously some services weren't able to deliver some of the savings, but they were able to mitigate it. You will know from the 34 million that came out in terms of workforce saving that we have had to strip back. It's, you know, we were and we still remain in a financial critical position that we still need to have tight control of our budget. So we're not able to give services a bunch of budget to cover agency staff that might happen, to cover sickness, what might happen, but we do ask the budget holders to manage that within their overall budget envelope. So we ask them, here is your establishment budget, where people may ask for time off without pay, which we do get some requests in for that. People ask for reduced hours, people ask to vary their contract, or just let me know all of that kind of natural vacancies that may arise. We ask the service directors or budget holders to manage their budget within that, and we expect them to cover that. That said, you will see in this report and throughout the month or the budget monitoring reports that we do get instances where they will say, I'm going to be overspent because I've had a significant sickness, I've had to get an agency cover, and I can't mitigate it. So we will get instances of that. What happens when we run out of stuff to sell? At the minute, I would say that MHCLG look at our balance sheet and say that we are quite asset heavy in terms of what's on there at the minute. A number of other councils are not in the same situation as us, where they're asking for exceptional financial support and they don't have the asset sales. So they are in a situation where they're asking for exceptional financial support and also then having to go out and borrow to pay for that exceptional financial support. That's not a position we're in. We are fortunate enough at the minute that we can sell assets to pay for the exceptional financial support that we've got. And I think that's where the importance of us using that money to deliver transformation activity to make sure we're in a financially sustainable position going forward. And we then reduce that reliance on EFS means that we wouldn't have to have those asset sales, because like you say, that's not an indefinite pot and it will run out. I think I may have answered all the questions, but if I haven't,
I think you've
come
done
back.
very well.
And apologies for there being so many. There were a couple I left out.
Well, there are blessings, I suppose. Thank you, Councillor Cravis. Is there anybody else in the room that wishes to comment? Councillor Trimnell, and then I've got Councillor Redmond online.
So mine's quite quick, hopefully. On page 127, paragraph 11, you speak about one of the districts that ran a successful business case for 18 months about administering council tax. I wondered whether you were able to say which of the districts that was, and are we taking on board any of the things that they did, considering it says it was successful? Is that why we are looking to hopefully improve our collection this time round? Thank you.
But you keep asking me questions that I'm not 100% on the answer for. So if I had to guess, I might have said it was Somerset West and Taunton, but I don't know. So I'm going to get the answer for you and then come back to you.
Councillor Lation.
I recall Mendip District Council did do a piece of work on the single person discount and it had good enough results that it paid for the external contractor to do that work and more. And I would presume that that might be something that we might look at in the future, because that was some years ago now.
Thank you. Well, Officer Hicks is going to investigate that one as well. And I suppose it is the role of scrutiny to ask difficult questions to which officers don't immediately have the answers. Right. Is there anybody else in the room that wishes to ask anything? If not, I'll go to Councillor Redmond online. Councillor Redmond.
Chair, thank you, members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Sorry I can't be with you today. I've got another appointment on the way to a funeral later. Just a couple of quick points in general first, but a little moan, please, Chair. It's just a little bit frustrating that this report is coming to you in this format with the time with the pressure that's against it. I would have hoped that the appropriate scrutiny committee would have been given the opportunity to look at their own particular elements, because it would give them having that expert eye to look over things and to comment and to feedback. So I'll speak specifically about the children's stuff, but it's just frustrating that the individual committees didn't have the opportunity. In relation to the children's report, so in first instance, the reference to external placements. I know Councillor Hobhouse has spoken about this. It's interesting you've spoken already about, and the 151 officer has indicated it's how you present things. It's the spin and change in things. So a couple of quick points. I'd be interested in, and specifically about the external placements, about understanding the decrease of just over £500,000 from month 11 to month 12. There have been a number of changes there. And one of the things I would have been asking if it had come to my committee would be for some more detail showing month 11 and month 12 and how the changes were there, because it would allow us to drill down a little bit. Because in my head, from my limited financial experience, very often there's some wiring that goes on. So you move, this one's underspent, so we move this money from here to there and stuff like that. So drilling down on that would have been quite interesting to understand. On the second paragraph of the external placements, I think the first line is a little bit, I would say, not accurate, it isn't the case, but it's saying that the overspend is predominantly due to there currently be a lack of foster carers. I think we've already made reference to the complexity of some of the young people we look after. Having the foster carers there may not also be the best place for them, because some of our young people are best placed in specific homes and specific with specific needs. And the end of that paragraph is a little bit frustrating to me. Once again, we're moving from placements to young people. It says at year end there were 5 children in unregistered placements costing £15,000 or so. That's not the young person's problem. That's the cost of the placement. I would have asked that we can talk about placements rather than young people. I think that would be fairer. Going down the report, I think it's important that, as well as criticising, I pick out the big good points, and it'd be wrong with me if I didn't talk about the point where it talks about education and home to school transport and the amazing work that team has done and continues to do for both the council and being able to influence things on a national basis. You've made reference to the number of children in our care. It's interesting to see the drop in the last month, and one of the things I'd be looking to do as a committee would be looking to see if we can understand that a little bit more. Just a couple of quick points. They're not quite, they're points rather than questions, Chair. So it gives the 151 officer an opportunity to pause for a second. But the designated school grant, Councillor Hobhouse again has made reference to the changes that the government has put in place. But more to the point, I'm a little bit frustrated that we've still not seen a deficit management plan. That keeps being kicked down the road, and that to me is one of the most important elements to this. So I'll ask any executive members or anyone in the room or listening that we can find a way to keep the pressure up on that. We need the deficit management plan to come to scrutiny, to go to executive, to go to council, so that we can understand how we're going to manage it. Yes, there's a breathing space for a couple of years, but the designated school grant is over £100 million by the end of this year, and we need to be concentrating that on a little bit more. Chair, again, I would just have liked to have the whole report that come to children and family scrutiny so that we can drill down a little bit more. But I thank officers for the report. I thank everyone for their time, and thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much, Councillor Redmond. Officer Hicks, do you wish to respond?
There's a lot of comments in there. Thank you, Councillor, for those, and I will take those on board in terms of how we present the report and make sure that we include some further information going forward in to aid that. That said, I appreciate the request to drill down into the information more. I think just in terms of external placements, you will remember as we went through the monthly reporting for 24-25, we could see that the forecast for children's was going up by £1 million a month thereon. So I think we took a decision to do some forecasting to project to the end of the financial year, which actually didn't come to fruition. So when we talk about the number of children in external placements, we did a trajectory that actually didn't didn't turn out as planned when we did that. So I think that's why we are seeing that movement in the overspend of external placements. That said, we are still reporting an overspend there of 11.899 million, so still a really significant number there. I mean, it is good that we got that down on that original forecast, but I'd say, you know, we are still experiencing a significant cost there, and some of that is trying to be mitigated by the services in terms of that fostering, and also what the Homes to Horizon can do to move children into those placements where possible. But we do know the challenges of dealing with complex children, and only certain children can be placed together in those homes, so we can't fill all of those beds. But I'll take away your comments and speak to the service, and I don't know if Councillor Shearer, as she's in the room, would like to add anything.
If I may, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Lee. Just a couple of small things to say, I think, very quickly. Just coming off the back of what Nicola has said, it might be reassuring to know, and you should be knowing this in a different way, not just here, but I think at the moment, if we make one of the placement changes we're anticipating in the next week, that would get us to 17 out of 19 beds in Homes and Horizons with children in them, and that's a really good thing. So, but that is only a very small slice, as you know very well, Lee. I did want to say your desire to see the DMP, the Deficit Management Plan, is as strong for me as it is for you. And I absolutely want to make sure that happens somehow, that we get that to you and we get that to exec. It is overdue and we need it as quickly as we can get it. So I just wanted to say I agree entirely with that one. Thank you for pointing out the education transport. I know that's very dear to your heart, and it's a brilliant nationally recognised achievement for our teams to do that, which is really good. But I think, yeah, that drilling down to really to understand and for people like yourself in this room and others to understand the complexity of understanding the numbers of children we look after at any one time and how much that flexes. The fact that children, for lots of children, it's better to be in a foster home, but not all. Absolutely get what you're saying, Lee. It's exactly right. And unfortunately, it's not just the numbers of children, but some children are coming in from situations which have been incredibly difficult for them, and so coming with a greater deal of needs. So it may be that some of our 18-year-olds have become 18-year-olds and fallen off our list of children we look after, but actually the ones that are coming in, the numbers may not be great, but they are complex. So I will take away, I've made notes, and I'll take those away, Lee, for you as well, and support Nicola in any answers she comes back with.
Okay, thank you. Officer Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to kind of interject ever so slightly in terms of some of the feedback from Councillor Redmond, and it follows Councillor Hobhouse's point earlier as well. In terms of the timing of the reports, and it was debated and agreed in terms of how this would be reported, but I think the message that's come through from the scrutiny debate so far, if you were to make that recommendation, is to review and consider the timing of these reports to ensure that other scrutinies get the opportunity to see them. That creates resourcing pressures, and it might be that we can use some of the scrutiny workshop style approach to address that, but I'll look to Jamie to kind of think about that with the service, about how we might incorporate some of that engagement given the recommendations from the Centre for Scrutiny and the scrutiny development elements. Certainly in terms of the forward plan, and to Councillor Redmond's point, there's definitely a need for that level of engagement with individual services, and one of the takeaways for me for this debate is that making sure there's a greater level of officer service representation in the room to be able to answer the questions of scrutiny as they go through. And it's great that we have Councillor Shearer here today for Children's, but I think we could have a broader level of representation to answer those questions. So leave that with me. But I am concerned about the resourcing pressures that were placed upon officers around the timing of reports. So it probably needs some thinking about how we do that into next year's outturn and develop an approach for scrutiny. So if you leave that with myself and Democratic Services colleagues, we can then work out what a timetable for that would be and how that workshop approach might indulge that right to get that right level of engagement. Sorry.
Thank you. As you will know, there's a scrutiny review working group in being at the moment, and part of what they need to be considering as part of their final recommendations are exactly what Councillor Redmond has said, the ability for individual scrutiny committees, which may of course be fewer than they currently are, and therefore that will have concentrated resources rather than dissipated it. The opportunity for those scrutiny committees to consider budgetary matters at an earlier stage. I think that's one of the key things that we're keen to see that will be coming forward in the recommendations from the working group. Okay, is there anybody else that wishes to comment?
Could I possibly come back quickly,
yes,
Chair?
Of course, Councillor
Just
Redmond.
in response to, I support the comments there, but one of the things that I know that you'll agree with me, but I think it's worth vocalising for this, but particularly because of Mr. Jones's comments there, there's a lot of council that seems to be forgetting something, that scrutiny is part of the day job and not an add-on. So to say there are resourcing issues, it's how we manage that that's a situation. It is often forgotten, and sometimes some of our committee chairs, I won't want to put words into anyone's mouth, feel as if scrutiny is a burden on officers, and that shouldn't be the case. And I just wanted to make that point.
Yes. Thank you, Lee, very much. I think that's a very, very well made point. Scrutiny is part of the process, not an add-on. But I think Mr. Jones absolutely agrees with that. I see him nodding vigorously on my right here. So we're all in agreement. Joy. Councillor Lation.
Thank you, Chair. It's been a really useful discussion and debate this morning, particularly for me, as I'm looking at the work plan 30th of July, and lead member for Finance, Procurement and Performance Annual Report, I think some of what we've heard this morning can really help me structuring that report to help Scrutiny and hopefully all members through the understanding of not only where we've been since, well, before vesting, and LGR and redundancies, and then through our restructure and further redundancies, all the transformation costs, how we're funding through capitalisation directive and flexible use of capital receipts. And then again, for the future, where we're looking, and this will be moving as we get, this won't be sorted out by the 30th of July, but this is for government. So not only the DSG deficit and our own deficit management plan, but how the government work on equalisation of council tax based on council tax base, sorry, too many of the same word in there, and also the business rates reset. I'm expecting at the Local Government Association conference next week that there will be a lot of discussion on all of these items, because as we've heard this morning, some of this is within our control and some of it is not within our control. And this council is of particular interest to others who are heading towards LGR and heading towards their own financial situations that are not improving. And the DSG deficits, of course, are part of that. And so there is a lot of interest in this council and how we have dealt with all of these challenges over the last couple of years and a bit more. So I think it has been really helpful this morning, and I'd like to thank committee members for that, and for Nicola for all of her answers, where she is doing a remarkable job at the moment as acting up, as well as doing her own job, which is enough as it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lation, and I'm sure we all endorse the comments you've made about Officer Hicks. So thank you for that. So, ladies and gentlemen, I don't see anybody else looking to speak on this agenda item. So to recap, I think we welcome very much the work that has been done, although quite clearly understanding that there is absolutely no room for complacency. There are some specifics that we continue to be particularly concerned about, especially the designated schools grant, the need for a deficit management plan, a number of questions about council tax and its collection, business rates and their collection. And we feel that that would be the subject very usefully of a separate briefing. So if that could be organised, please, we think that would be very beneficial. And otherwise, noting the correction to the figures highlighted by Councillor Filmer, I don't believe that Scrutiny has noted anything particular in terms of the recommendations for the executive. So I'm therefore, I think, asking the committee today to note the items being put forward to the executive, and that I believe we are not dissenting from the points that are being put forward. Is that all right with everybody? Yeah, everyone happy? Good. Nicola, thank you very much again. That was extremely informative, very helpful, and thank you for answering the questions so well. And thank you to whoever your friend was for allowing you to phone into them. Good. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll move on then, please, to agenda item 6, which is the Housing Revenue Account Revenue and Capital Budget Monitoring Outturn 24-25. I don't know if Councillor Lation wishes to say anything about this before Kerry Prisco embarks on presenting the report.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say how delighted I was to see Kerry Prisco in the room when I arrived. This is a significant turnaround from Q3 to Q4, and I'm sure the committee will want to understand a lot more for those reasons. So I will immediately hand over to Kerry Prisco, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Lucian. Hello, my name is Kerry Prisco. I'm the Strategic Finance Business Partner for the Housing Revenue Account. Referring to page 151 in the agenda pack, going to introduce the financial outturn for the Housing Revenue Account for 24-25. So the executive summary summarises that we're presenting a positive outturn position. This includes a net underspend of 3.377 million, an increase in general reserves to 17.834 million, and a capital outturn of 39.736. As we go through the report, going into page 154 and 155 onwards, the information provides in terms of revenue account outturn highlights that the report you received for Q3, that was an overspend of 1.327 million. There has been a decrease in this revenue forecast and it has moved by 4.704 million. This is to give you that net underspend of 3.377 million. This is a 5.92% of gross income budget, just to kind of try to put it into context percentage wise. So in terms of the main variances, just summarising the report following on kind of pages 156 onwards, the main variances for the year and the movement from the Q3 position was mainly to do with compliance spends. That's paragraph 32. This is where the service was overly prudent in their budget estimates in light of the regulator and what is actually required to deliver. They delivered what is necessary and they are continuing to update their estimated spend on an annual basis and doing that at the moment for 25-26 as part of the budget monitoring process. Another area was vacancy savings. The service has experienced quite a lot of challenges recruiting to a number of positions throughout the service and they are now progressing. Central recharges, paragraph 37. We've actually refreshed all the SLAs for between the general fund and the HRA, and that's referred to within the budget setting report in March, and those budgets have been updated accordingly. Also, majority of this kind of changes depreciation charges. So moving on to page 158, it talks about depreciation charges, net interest payable, which is linked to the capital programme, and the provision for bad debts. So whilst there are some areas that we could have forecasted to some degree at Q3, they're acknowledging that they would not have been the final position. So for example, some of these areas such as net interest payable and the provision for bad debt are things that we cannot finalise and confirm figures for until the end of the financial year. We're also going to be looking to the capital programme to see how we can improve those forecasts. As I said, it relates to that directly impacts the net interest payable charges. There is a plan in place to implement improvements and to change our approach for 25-26 to help try and provide early insights, but also to enable us to close, to produce the actual statutory accounts for the 31st of May, because we're going to have a month left, 1 month less to do that next financial than we did this year. And work's already commenced in this financial year to address these areas I've mentioned specifically. Moving on to pages 158, talking about the capital outturn. So the actual spend in 24-25 was 39.736 million. We are proposing a carry forward of 11.651 million for schemes to be spent in 25-26 and in future years. Just to note that during 24-25 and the quarterly reports you received, you have the members of pre-approved carry forwards of 44.403 million in advance of the year-end process of expected spend in future years. So just to kind of summarise, in terms of new budget additions of new budget additions, budget deletions, pre-approved carry forwards and proposed carry forwards, the total budget for 25-26 to be spent over the next 5 years will be 264.903 million. Moving on to pages 159 onwards, talking about the reserves position. So table 4 on page 159 summarises the overall usable reserves for the HRA, and the HRA has successfully been able to maintain its reserves positions. as referred to and as part of their strategy that presented in the budget setting report in March. So in terms of earmark reserves, paragraph 45 specifically, we've got 0.184 million, so 184k of earmark reserves left to use. And in terms of general reserves, which is paragraphs 46 to 49, our general reserves are predicted to be 17.834 million. So this is 11.971 above the recommended minimum balance, which was updated in March to 5.863 million. So that, just to remind officers, members, that the general reserves is there as our last point of call to help provide ongoing financial resilience and mitigation for any unbudgeted risks that may come up in the future. So thinking about the economic operating environment and how that's changing, but also any regulatory requirements that may be new during the financial year or future years. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Councillor C.
Thank you, Chairman. Referring to table 1, the depreciation figure changed quite substantially during the year, and I'm a bit surprised as depreciation tends to be very well known long-term spend, and it accounts for the change accounts for roughly half of the surplus generated. What's gone on there, please?
Thank you. Okay, so within the report, I was trying to find the correct paragraph. So on page 158, paragraph 39 does refer to dwelling depreciation. Just to remind members that depreciation is transferred to the major repairs reserve, which is very unique for the HO. It doesn't happen in the general funds, and that is to help finance capital major works and improvements capital spend during the financial year to help to restate the condition of properties as they depreciate each financial year. So in terms of the actual calculation for depreciation, this does depend on stock numbers. It depends on the component replacement price of all the different units, components. And we also look to the inflation that is provided. So we use September CPI, which is issued in the October, in terms of inflating our component unit price in the year. So in terms of available information, as I mentioned in my introduction, yes, we probably could have provided earlier insights into what that was as part of the Q3 report, but unfortunately, time pressures working on the budget setting report, which was quite challenging this financial year. Apologies that we were unable to provide that information as part of the Q3 report. We are already looking at 25-26, so for the Q1 report, we're going to look at our actual spend for 24-25 as our first estimates against budget as an early indication, and to again commence work looking at more detailed calculations to better inform that in Q2 and Q3.
Yes, perhaps you could explain. I thought.
Is your tea?
I thought repairs to a capital asset.
Are you okay if I can? What? Are you okay if I carry on down there now then?
Yeah. Yes, I thought repairs were a revenue expenditure, so I'm unclear as to why they're affecting the depreciation.
Okay, so general repairs are revenue expenditure, correct. In terms of the capital programme, we have a cyclical programme of replacing major components such as kitchens, bathroom, windows and doors. Those major components are a legitimate capital spend. So as if you imagine like a kitchen, for example, you install a kitchen, say in year 1, and then, and I apologise, I don't know the exact time frame for replacing kitchens for their programme, but say, for example, the kitchen was to last 15 years. Each financial year, that kitchen would slowly depreciate. And what we're allowed to do then in year 15 or 16 is to then replace that component and capitalise that cost. So what we're using is that depreciation of our assets to then fund the capital programme.
So if a door needed repair, that would be a revenue expense. If it needed to be replaced, it would be a capital expense.
That is correct, as part of the capital programme for replacing doors.
So, Chairman, I think, and again, I may be out of date here, I think the regulations that apply to the main council accounts include a de minimis amount for projects work. Projects, of course, can be capital, and replacing a kitchen could theoretically be a project, but I thought there was a de minimis limit under which it just went into the revenue account. And I would be surprised if a kitchen broke the, I'm thinking, for example, when a previous council took over the Westland enterprise, we had to kit out the kitchen with pots and pans. It was below our 20,000 threshold. It went into revenue, whether we liked it or not, and caused problems when it arrived, which is why I remember it. Have we not got the same applying in the housing revenue account?
You're about to say this is a question for the cabinet to consider, aren't you? Kerry.
Well, I'm not hearing very well. So in terms of, I think you're asking about, are we allowed to capitalise our kitchen replacements? Well, so in terms of a de minimis, I would look to Nicola, but I think we would go and double check, but I don't think we actually have a de minimis. But in terms of trying to put it into context, so a door, if you feel that a door would be quite a small expense, what we're allowed to do is to multiply that by the 10,000 property. So if we do have a door replacement programme, because we are replacing upwards of 10,000 doors, it is legitimate that we can capitalise the cost of those doors.
That makes sense to me, Chair.
Right, thank you, Councillor Seeb. Is there anybody else in the room who wishes to comment, please? Councillor Cravett, I've got Councillor Mansell online, but far away, Councillor Cravett.
Thank you.
Councillor Trimnell.
Actually, this report again, I get added to ones to keep and look back at. I was interested in, it actually gets back to the vacancies issue. Actually, obviously talked about vacancies of, I presume it was the maintenance teams, etc., etc. Bearing in mind, as I said, you know, £100 is only £100 last year, is only £80 this year. Those are the other way around. It's the other way around, isn't it? The question is how are you keeping up with the cost of labour when it comes to maintenance, etc.? And I suppose I don't want to use, but yeah, everybody knows that cost of labour in certain fields of maintenance and construction is going up, as well as materials, etc. How do you manage to recruit into that with our levels of salary levels, I suppose is the way I'm looking at it? And is it at risk in the future? Is it at risk of the future becoming more difficult if the government got their way and actually built half the amount of homes that we actually need?
Okay, so in terms of that question, what I would need to do is take that away to the service. I know that they've had a lot of activity with regards to the challenges they've been had, and it'd be more appropriate for them to come back with you, and if that's okay, please, Chair.
Right. Thank you. Councillor Trimnell.
Thank you. So mine's quite a simple question, I think. I think it should be you may have even answered it in some ways. But I noticed there was £100,000 underspend on the general repairs. And it said that this was demand-led and weather-dependent. And so I'm assuming the weather-dependent, we're looking at sort of roofs and door sills and windows and things like that. Does that money get put into a ring-fence reserve for spending in times when the weather dependent element of it makes it more likely that people want repairs? So that was my first question. And just an additional question that may be right for here or not, I don't know, but do we ever buy housing stock, existing housing stock that's appropriate, or do we only take on houses that come to us through building schemes?
Councillor Lation.
Yeah, we're just discussing which funds from government apply for this. So there have been some purchases of suitable homes recently for housing refugees. You may recall that was a government fund, and that housing stock then goes into the stock of this council when for future use by whoever is on Home Finder. I presume. But there are government funds. I mean, at the minute, I'm absolutely sure that every council in this land would wish that they could have more housing stock, because we all know, don't we, that access to decent homes is a massive indicator for public health, and we have got a crisis in this country. So I don't think I've got anything else to add at that point, except to say I wish we could do more of it. I wish there were more government funds. You'll know that affordable and social rent houses come through as Section 106. And then when things are delayed and when planning applications don't move at the pace that developers need them to do, they come back under viability. And the thing that often goes first is the social housing. So there are lots of things, lots of factors contributing to the housing crisis in this country. I think we'd probably all agree in this room, if we could wave a magic wand and put one thing right, it would probably be to increase our housing stock in Somerset so that we could have more homes at social rent and affordable rent. To be quite honest, even social rent now, it's not what it was. It's still a really significant figure out of a monthly income for a family or a household of any size. Do you want to add anything, Kerry?
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, so the scheme that Elizabeth was referring to is called the Local Authority Housing Fund, and we've actually been through wave one, which was funded, had that funding. It was also supported with Homes for Ukraine grant funding as well, and then we're actually going through wave three at present, and again with more government funding, and the HRA is also topping up borrowing to match fund that wave three scheme. So yes, we are doing that, as well as like Section 106 purchases, as well as our new builds. In terms of answering your other questions, so just referring to the report on page 157 and paragraph 31. Yes, so in terms of general repairs, so the reason why we had a slight underspend this financial year, so the budget, again, is just purely an estimate. It's very demand-led. It depends on the cost of materials as well. So their estimate for this financial year wasn't too far off, which is pretty impressive. So in terms of the weather demand, it depends if we have a really cold winter. Do the pipes freeze up, for example? Just things like that, really.
So is that money ring fenced though, in order to make sure that what we don't spend on repairs now is spent on repairs later? I just wonder whether it's going back in the general to be spent on something different.
So it's the latter. So it's a budget estimate each financial year. If they underspend, it goes towards the HRA's whole underspend position. So it forms part of that overall underspend of 3.3 million that I referred to. It's not ring fenced to be spent next year, because next year they've got the budget again, the annual budget again. So for general repairs, it's an annual budget to see if that is sufficient, or if not, report any variances against that, like the Void Service has been doing.
Dave, I don't know if you can hear us, but you are the next speaker. Yes. Councillor Mansell.
Thank you. I can. I must admit, I lost sound for a moment then, but thank you. Yes, I had a question. When I looked at the report, I was thinking, well, I'd be interested to know how what I regard as two of the biggest programmes underway are going. One is the new house building, and the other is on decarbonisation. And it was a little bit difficult to spot those in the report. I think there is indication in appendixes on the capital programme for appendixes B, C and D, and social housing development. Well, that must be the new buildings. So I think that one's clear, although if it does include other things too, I think it would be helpful if for there to be a breakdown. But if that is essentially just new build, well, that's clearly where it is. The decarbonisation isn't really easily spottable at all, although I suspect it's under major works. And could I suggest that I think it would be helpful if there could be some breakdown for that, so we can see how the spending on those programs are going. I understand there should be considerable overlap in these works too, and some of the earlier comments are relevant here. So if you have a replacement external door or replacement windows, it's important that those are matched up with what is aiming to be achieved on decarbonisation to avoid double spending and avoid wasteful expenditure. And that's an important part of partly how the decarbonisation should be progressed. So I'm sort of conscious of that and wanting that to still be reflected, but I would like to see clear breakdowns for new housing if that line isn't the clear one, and as you gathered on decarbonisation as alongside other major works. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mansell. Councillor Lation.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to reference first, in our budget setting in March, there was a paper on new build for HRA, and that was the first time that it extended beyond the old Taunton Dean area and the former Sedgemoor area across into other parts of Somerset. I'll try to find that online and paste the link to it in the chat for this meeting. If I could just hand over to Kerry again, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so Councillor Mansell, yes, so Appendix B, you're correct that the outturn, that provides the outturn position for 24-25, and that for the decarbonisation works, that is included within the major works line on the report. The detail around the decarbonisation programme, there were some provided in the budget setting reports, which went to full council on the 5th of March. So there's information not only about the social housing decarbonisation fund, but also reference to the Eco4 scheme, noting that that is in the main fully funded through grant and not the council itself, which is really good news. I can definitely take away your request to split out the decarbonisation work. I can discuss that with 151 and with the service to see about presentation, for example, with that. If further information is required around the progress on decarbonisation and Eco4, for example, then I can take that request through, or you can put that request through yourself to the service for more information that they can provide you.
Okay, thank you. That sounds good going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, are there any other questions in the room or online? If not, the recommendations that the executive will be considering are before us. I again have not heard anything that substantially or significantly alters our perception of those recommendations. And I am assuming, therefore, ladies and gentlemen, you're happy that we note what the executive will be considering. But we thank again Officer Prisco for that presentation. You will have picked up some refinements perhaps to the presentation that might be made in the future. But we again welcome the report. Thank you very much, and thank you for the positive news that it contains. Right, ladies and gentlemen, we now have the opportunity for a 10-minute comfort break. So we will reassemble in 10 minutes' time. So if we could be back, pleased, by 5 to 12. Thank you. Right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the reconvened scrutiny meeting. We now move on to agenda item 7, which is the draft corporate performance framework. You will find this from page 171 in the agenda pack, and this is going to be presented by Sarah Hawkins, Head of Assurance, Performance and Risk.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Chair. So we are, and first of all, apologies if I am a bit muffled. I've got a problem with my left ear at the moment, so I can't hear entirely clearly. So do just ask if you want me to repeat anything. So we're developing the new performance framework for the organisation. This framework will set the minimum expectations for how we manage performance. Essentially, it's all about how we use data and insight to inform actions that will improve outcomes for the people of Somerset. So the ask of Scrutiny today, and why we've gone with a sort of slides approach, is to share some of the key components of the framework with you and to get your feedback on those, and in particular Scrutiny's role and responsibilities in relation to the framework, and also Scrutiny's views on some of the organisational health lens element of performance. And I'll come on to that later in terms of what we mean by that and why we're introducing that into how we think about performance. So moving on, so to the second slide, the performance titled Performance Management Framework. So I first just wanted to touch really quickly on the purpose of having the framework itself. Essentially, we're trying to define what performance management is all about at the council. We want to make sure that we've got really clear roles and responsibilities related to performance management.
Sarah, sorry, just to interrupt.
Yeah.
To be quite clear, members have got the slides in their pack. Members online should also have access to those slides. However, it has now been put on the board. Okay, thank you. Sorry, Sarah, thank you.
Thank you. So we're on the next one, if we can go one forward, please. Great. So in terms of the purpose of the framework, making sure that we've got a level of consistency across the council, and that we have that right level of corporate oversight of our performance. And obviously all of that is ultimately, as I've said, to improve services and outcome for people and communities as we look to achieve our aims and objectives. Through the performance framework, so in terms of the different aspects of it, so this is the goals and the approach and kind of the culture and accountability. We want to clearly articulate our ambitions, priorities and our desired outcomes, really want to strive to achieve best value and value for money in everything that we do, and consistent with our target operating model, really champion the use of evidence and data to ensure effective decision making and delivery, and that can involve trend data, benchmarking, all about setting performance in context. Hopefully it should be coming up. So moving on to the next one, which is the principles. Yeah, so why have principles? We hope these will help us in terms of guiding our approach to how we manage performance and kind of set out what really matters most to us. So we've developed these as we've worked on the framework, and they're the kind of things that keep coming back in terms of feedback. And again, these are consistent with our target operating model. So we're looking at how we can make sure there's a clear accountability for our actions and their impact at all levels, making sure that we're really transparent in terms of how we regularly review and clearly communicate our performance, focus on quality. So we know that accurate and assured data is really important to support timely decision making. Value, so making sure we're generating insights that focus on value and help us to understand impact. There's a real danger that we can produce loads and loads of information and actually it doesn't add that value that we're looking for, and proportionality as well. So monitoring and reporting and reviewing using the right kind of approaches, not trying to be overly administrative. Yeah. I think if you
Chair, we've still not got it right on the screen.
No, and
why?
If you keep clicking.
But can I just say that the sheets are actually in our agenda packs, so you should be able to have access to them, and anybody joining online should be in the same position. So you've got access to them. The fact that we've got them on screen as well is an added bonus if they turn up in entirety. I think I would
Shall
press
keep
on.
going?
So, yeah, keep going, and hopefully the screens will catch up. But as I say, refer to your agenda packs. That's the best thing.
Thank you. So the next one that we're looking at here is the golden thread, which has got the coloured diagram. So obviously this is some of the glue that sets the context for our performance framework in relation to our priorities. So we've got our council plan and our core strategies that underpin our priorities. We've then got the actions, so our business plan, our transformation plan, our target operating model, and then our service plans and individual plans. And all of those things set out the actions that we're going to do to achieve our priorities. And so our performance framework is really about understanding the progress where we are against those actions and identifying ways that we can improve delivery of them. I want to mention risks as well, because obviously this framework sits alongside, which is really important, our risk management framework in terms of how we identify any threats to achieving our vision and our priorities as well. So I think that sort of helps glue things together. Moving on to the next one, which is titled the Continuous Improvement Cycle. So we're really aiming to promote continuous improvement as a way of working across the council. We really hope that it will help guide how we identify and plan changes, how we implement them, measure the effectiveness of the results, and take action based on those findings. So how we learn and how we adapt is going to be really important to that. So regularly taking the time to understand the impact of our improvement actions. And I wanted to mention benchmarking here as well, because again, it's a useful tool to help us review, to provide context for how we're currently performing, but also to really help inform how we do things differently. So we're looking at how we get those benchmarking tools and support services and teams to use them. The next one is titled Corporate Planning and Reporting Cycle. So this is about how we report our quarterly performance at a corporate level. So this is currently our quarterly performance report. So at the end of each quarter of our financial year, performance from the previous quarter is collated and reported. And that will follow the pattern of being taken to a performance risk and budget board. They will look at that quarterly performance report alongside our quarterly budget monitoring report and our quarterly risk report. It will then go to executive before being referred into scrutiny, corporate and resources. So that's the flow. And just as an example, the quarter one report for this financial year will be going to executive at the start of September and then to scrutiny, corporate and resources. So we're really aiming to join that up in terms of how we look at performance, risk and budget alongside one another. If we move on to the next one, which is the performance monitoring, governance and assurance. So this is not necessarily about reporting. This is really about the way we work to regularly review how we're performing. And as you can see in terms of some of the detail there, how we're looking at our performance alongside our risk and our budget, and what that looks like from an individual level up to team level, directorate level, and across the organisation as well. So just touching on scrutiny, corporate and resources as part of this flow. So obviously scrutiny, corporate and resources will provide that check and challenge function. So performance will be reviewed by scrutiny CNR on a quarterly basis, and the committee will be asked to scrutinise the executive's response to instances of underperformance and the proposed management actions. It may also be the executive referring performance matters to the relevant scrutiny committees for consideration to consider any potential improvements or further management actions. You'll also see there that we've got the specific scrutiny committees which can consider specific areas of performance related to the remit of those committees. And apologies, I don't think communities is on. Oh, it is on the visual. That's great. On the right hand side, so where we've got the statutory officers board, so I just wanted to mention that, and this relates to the organisational health aspect of corporate performance. So how we're ensuring that good governance exists and really taking that kind of cross-cutting view of everything going on across the organisation, not just some of the service specific performance. So we wanted to add that there just to show how we're getting the kind of right cross-cutting assurance and looking at some of those cumulative impacts. If I move on to the next one, and we're nearly done, then we can invite feedback. So this outlines the 3 lenses of corporate performance. I think currently, if we look at our quarterly performance report, we're probably heavily focused on some of our strategic performance and some of our service performance. So what we're looking to do is bring a more rounded, more holistic view and consider how we then present that through. So strategic performance, that's about our progress towards our council plan and transformation goals. Also, we'd like to do more work in terms of how that's informed by our horizon scanning and strategic benchmarking. Service delivery, so we're talking about some of our key actions, projects and improvement at service level. We'd expect to see those in our service improvement plans. Some of the key measures that help us understand how we're progressing towards delivery of our key strategies and service standards. And then the organisational health lens, as I've said, it's really about that cross-cutting and cumulative look at our performance. That the kind of things we'd see there is, workforce data, health and safety, customer feedback, and also how we're progressing against sort of that cumulative picture of our external reviews and improvement actions, because we know we've got a lot of those. So we're doing some work in terms of how we really understand that and as a sort of collective picture. So the next slide, which goes into a bit more detail on organisational health, we just wanted to outline some of the current indicators that have been in our quarterly performance report and list some potential other considerations. And there is potentially some interesting links here as well with some of our strategic risks. So, for example, we do have a strategic risk around contract management. Actually, in our performance report, we don't have anything in that area. So I think there's some merits in this area which will provide that more holistic view. And then finally, the last 2 slides, we've just outlined there some of the roles and responsibilities. The framework itself will include all roles and responsibilities for all stakeholders, but we just wanted to include this in particular on slide 10 and the outline role for scrutiny. I will pause there and invite any questions and feedback.
Thank you very much. So the first member to catch my eye was Councillor Filmer.
Thank you, Chair. It was just a couple of queries if I could. One was just to get a feeling of do you feel there are adequate resources both within your team in terms of dealing with all this and within the various departments who are working on stuff. My slight concern would be there's obviously a lot of pressure on all the teams at the moment to do the day job and just get stuff done. There's always a danger that people will see this as an add-on rather than being part of it. So how are you going to embed that into the teams to realise that this is part of helping them get a better solution? And the other question I really wanted to ask was relating to page 176, and you were saying the process of how this comes through. Just wanted to understand the thinking of why during that process it goes to executive before it comes to scrutiny. Would it not be helpful for it maybe for us to feed in so the executive have got a few other comments that they can bear in mind rather than it come to us after the event and decisions have already been taken?
Thank you. We absolutely recognise in terms of the capacity pressures across the organisation. I think what we are looking to do with our team is how we support services and make this as easy as possible for them. So one of the key enablers that I didn't mention is our IdeaGen system, which is our performance and risk management system. And what actually that enables us to do is to use the system to hold our risk, our performance, our improvement action insight, and use what we call portal functionality like a dashboard to support, for example, if it was a DMT, to really focus by exception, because they can go into their portal and they can see anything that's starting to red flag or overdue or, you know, a persistently high risk area. So we really hope, and we're working with the organisation at the moment to develop those portals, that can really make it easy in terms of enabling them to focus where it matters most. And that also includes in terms of the improvement actions that I mentioned. So we know we've got lots and lots of improvement action plans, but what we can do is use that system to bring those together, and also remove some of the duplication, because we know we have improvement actions that will be a risk mitigation improvement action plan over here, and the worst thing from an officer perspective is to have to update that in multiple different places. So we really hope that will do some of the a lot of the heavy lifting, as it were, and really help focus the minds and make it easier for people. In terms of the scrutiny and the executive and the flow, so the proposal is to go into executive in advance of scrutiny to enable us to get really timely information into those forums. Otherwise, we'd be looking potentially later again, but also to make sure that scrutiny can really go into the detail to identify areas where we want to go deeper, deep dive into things. In terms of the flow in the diagram, that feedback from Scrutiny, Corporate and Resources would also come back into our Performance Risk and Budget Board. Our Performance Risk and Budget Board meet very frequently. So we're making sure that we've got those feedback loops in to act again, if that makes sense. But yeah, ultimate aim, we really want to get the performance, risk and budget information into executive and scrutiny within the same meetings and make that as timely as possible.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lation.
If I could just add to that, I think what we're looking at today is all about how scrutiny works and how it can be most effective. And I think that's exactly the work that you've been overseeing with the working group. And I think that really needs to feed in here so that we all 110 of us, understand how that is intended to work in the future, so that we're not, and I'm not saying just going through papers again and again at committees and then through to full council, but that actually there is a much greater opportunity to feed in and make a difference through scrutiny. That is my hope of how we'll be working in the future.
Thank you. I think that's important. So on page 180, for instance, the very clear-cut division between executive members and scrutiny members perhaps needs to be a little more fluid. So that there is the opportunity for scrutiny as part of its overview task to be feeding into the left-hand side rather than just commenting after the event. So I think that's where I would see perhaps some amendment coming forward here. For instance, executive members set strategic direction by providing a clear vision, absolutely right, and approving the council plan. So what role does scrutiny have, for instance, perhaps in informing the council plan? Mr. Waldridge.
Thank you, Chair. I think what you're doing there is particularly amplifying, I know, the work of the scrutiny task and finish group looking at good scrutiny. I think part of that also looks at that piece that we've been doing around better alignment through scrutiny in terms of holding the executive to account on budget, risk and performance. I know Sarah's already covered this and so has Liz, but I think it's also looking at recognising, say, where we've got MTFP development. So there are two parts clearly in terms of the budget. There's the budget management and monitoring on a quarterly basis, but there's also the development of the budget. Similarly, in terms of performance and council plan, there are the developments of policies, and that links much more into that overview functional area, which I know we're keen clearly to nurture and develop more of. So I think there's something as part of this potentially looking also at how scrutiny can add value to the development, particularly of the forward year performance indicators, as well as on a quarterly basis, holding the executive to account and the executive leadership team to account in terms of their management actions to keep delivery on track with what the indicators and targets have been set. I think there's this balance here about where scrutiny can add value for overview and development, as well as also holding to account.
Yeah, exactly. Sarah?
Yeah, we can certainly update that to strengthen so what you're currently seeing in terms of the scrutiny members outline role. So we will make that change.
Thank you. Super. Councillor Seeb.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the golden thread, I think there is an interrelationship between actions, risk and performance, which requires a little bit more from the performance framework. Risks, for example, you have risks which you specifically plan against, you have contingency plans for that contingency, and you have more generic risks which are perhaps in the environment where the issue is business resilience, business continuity planning, and frankly holding an adequate reserve of cash. And I wasn't picking up a particular flavour from the performance elements of the presentation, that we were making sure that resilience plans were in place at the department level, that the risks were being enumerated where they required us to take account of that in determining our reserves, for example, or indeed risk over time, where it might be that a programme gets stretched or a delivery produces a lower level of performance. Really, there should be some indication as to how a department is, how on top of the problem a department is, shall we say. And I wasn't really getting that flavour in the performance figures. On the workforce side of the preparedness, the performance, the monitoring side. Hang on, let me just get the words as they were on the presentation. Can't do two pages. The organisational health. That's what I was looking for. On the workforce side, we've got a lot of hard numbers expressed in this, but I feel this is an area where really the places we've tripped or had to deal with stumbles in the last year have been around the soft things of the morale. I think is probably a very good way of putting it. How are the communications landing? What effects are they having on people? And I would like to see rather more soft indicators as well as the hard numbers, because things such as morale are probably very easily assessed by asking, what's it like in the department? How's morale at the moment? Have you got, do you feel that people are under pressure? I know at the moment those needles are likely to be hard over on red most of the time, but we shouldn't be operating in that band. And I think the performance network ought to take those softer issues in, particularly with organisational health.
Okay.
Thank you for your feedback. Just taking the workforce feedback first. So we are in the process of reviewing those workforce metrics and what would be most helpful. We're actually doing that this Friday with the relevant directorate management team. That will also really focus on the people strategy and how we understand our progress as an organisation against the people strategy. And we can certainly feed back into those conversations around how we can balance some of the softer, harder measures. Certainly it's something we're looking at to really help us understand our progress. In terms of our risk, some organisations, in fact, actually hold their risk and performance framework as a combined framework. That might be something as we improve our ways of working we get to. We do have a risk framework which I believe was approved early in Q1, which does set out clearly how we manage our risk at strategic, tactical and operational levels. We have done that alignment across to the performance framework, and in terms of the performance monitoring, governance and assurance, that kind of ways of working approach, our aim was to try to articulate how how that can work in practice, considering risk and performance and financial insight alongside one another, be that from, like I said, team, directorate, organisational level. So it's something we will try to make sure is clear in our performance framework document.
Thank you. Peter, by all means come back, and I know Councillor Lation wants to.
If I could just quickly come back, I think the point I was making was not about the specifics of managing risk, but rather about whether people were managing the risk, which is a slightly subtler thing. You know, are you getting behind on informing up the tree? Are you getting behind on your preparations?
Thank you. And just as we're working with services in terms of how we support them in terms of performance management practice, that's absolutely the same with risk management. And I think the example I mentioned about us having a strategic risk company and contract management, but actually we haven't got corresponding performance indicators that are visible. I think that's where we can strengthen some of that join up as well in terms of how we're looking at the data. But yeah, certainly we are working with services to try to support practice improvement in terms of risk and performance.
Councillor Lation.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add something on current indicators that I think we do need to describe our financial sustainability in there, because I know we're referencing council tax and business rate collection rates, but there's a lot more to what we're doing as an overall indicator of the health of this council, because if our financial health is not good, none of our health is good. So I think, if that's okay, Chair, I'd really like us to have more on current indicators on financial sustainability.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Jolly good. Councillor Hobhouse.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've already brought part of the subject I wanted to talk about, which is scrutiny's involvement. Where you are going to scrutiny, not this scrutiny committee, you have no feedback going back to any point of the process, and that definitely needs to be there. I would suggest it go straight back to directorate meetings. And what other thing that concerns me is that you've got this scrutiny committee coming in after executive, which means that in one of the functions of scrutiny is to brief the executive on what is coming to them, and you're losing that aspect. If that makes sense.
Need a bigger piece of paper.
Sorry?
Needs a bigger piece of paper. I agree.
Does that, I mean, I personally would send it to scrutiny, then executive.
If I could just come back on that, and Jamie Jackson and you, Chair, will have to forgive me if I say the wrong thing now. I understand through the work that was done looking at scrutiny that in, was it 40 something meetings, there were a very small number, 4 recommendations for executive. I think what we're all trying to do now is change that relationship between executive and scrutiny, so that scrutiny comes in a different way, dives deeper and concentrates more on specific parts of this council's business, where, like this morning, it's been incredibly helpful to me to hear as much about where people don't 100% understand where we've been and where we're going. We need to have opportunities to work like that. I would say in a workshop setting, where I would hugely appreciate the ability to sit down, perhaps not in a formal meeting, and actually discuss where I've learned from working with all our amazingly good officers who are keeping hold of such a huge amount of business, not just because of the size of the council, but because of the breadth and depth of this council's services and the challenges for many councils across the country. I do really hope that we will be working differently on risk and performance, being together in the same directorate, that we will reset that relationship between scrutiny and executive, and that we will find ways between all of the members of all of the scrutiny committees to improve this council, because that is why we're here, because we want the best for the people of Somerset, and this is one of the routes for us to achieve that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Albice, you want to come back?
Can I come back a minute? One of the functions of scrutiny is to actually put in place a member's decision so that you don't get call-ins. And if you do it this way round, you are likely to get a call-in.
Chair, I understand that. I think that's part of the reset of the relationship that I referred to.
I think we're all heading in the same direction. I've got Councillor Johnson next, and then Councillor Filmer wants to come back.
Thank you. My brain's going off on tangents with this and sort of trying to place this exactly as to what it's going to cover and what it won't be covering. And I've had chats with Scott about, where audits step in and where corporate resources step in and where the boundaries are. And one of the things I'm trying to work out in my head, this performance report, where will it sit in terms of budgets? Where will it sit in terms of the performance on delivering financial situations? And I'm not quite getting a feel on whether that will be part of this or not. So I wondered if you just clarify that. And particularly with things like, one of the things I feel I have an absence of knowing about is when it comes to grant funding, government grant funding. So we've had this situation with the red brick, we've got the high street funds, we've got the grants for the BSIP monies. Where does monitoring of performance of those come in? Will that be part of this performance management? Because I don't always feel I get the information on how those have operated. Have they delivered where they were supposed to deliver? And that's something I'd quite like to know where that sits within this process. The staffing, absolutely, I agree with what Mr. Sieb, Councillor Sieb, has said. I would like to see some sort of performance element of, is the structure delivering what we need? And I'm not seeing that element of staffing in the what's listed. But we've had the restructure. A big part of our performance is whether our staff can deliver the work they need to deliver. And I understand that's probably part of other reports as well, but I think it could be a big part of this performance management as well. I just wondered if you could sort of expand on how that could be incorporated into how we are we at risk because we don't have the right number of staff? Are we at risk? Is that element of staffing which I support more needs to come into the report potentially?
If I could just start on the answer for Councillor Johnson, I agree with you that there is huge, it is pressure on officers. I would suggest there is on members too at the moment, because having gone through LGR, financial emergency and transformation with the restructure, we've probably done more in 2.5 years than most councils would do in 10 years, maybe more. That is my suggestion. I've got nothing to back it up with, but that's how it feels. For me, once we can get the quarterly reporting for performance and for risk and for budget coming forward at the same time, my real hope is that it will start to make more sense to members then, and the overlaps between those three areas, which we see also at the what's generally known as PRB, Performance Risk and Budget Board, where actually we do both challenge and deep dive. So how those meetings, how the scrutiny meetings, the executive meetings, and then those papers that go on to full council, I would say that this is part of our transformation of this still fairly new council, and I see the year we're in now, 25-26, as the year we make that a reality. I don't know whether Mr. Wooldridge or Mr. Jones could come in at all there as to whether, am I on the right track? or not? Because if I'm not, tell me now, please.
Well, Mr. Jones indicated he wished to speak, so he will now pronounce. Alan.
Thank you, Chair. And so absolutely, Councillor Leishon, as always, has summarised it perfectly in terms of the approach. The intent really is to ensure that there's an opportunity for bringing in the expertise and that additional level of scrutiny from this committee and the other committees, with that guidance of there are concerns of issues around risk or issues around performance that the executive or performance risk and budget board would want to see executive getting into the detail of that. So, for example, we've talked a lot about children's placements. Is the level of scrutiny associated with that matter appropriate? Do we need to get more into the detail of it? How do we get under the skin of those things? And then giving scrutiny the opportunity to really get into it, and to bring in Councillor Hobhouse's point earlier about making recommendations. That's exactly the intent, so that then scrutiny can make those recommendations to executive of they've done that deep dive, they've made that assessment, there are some considerable risks and issues that need to be addressed. So you have that ability then to really get under the skin of it with the right amount of time, rather than seeing the entirety of the performance risk report every month and having to wade through all of that detail and pick out points yourself. Of course, you still have that ability to do that, because you can do that as part of the executive reporting process. And actually, you can call matters in if you wish to do so. It's something that we would try and avoid through that good management of items. But if ultimately there is a concern of scrutiny, you want to call a matter in, you still have that ability to do it. So it's something that you've got all of those tools in your toolbox, but Councillor Leishon's kind of summarised it perfectly, which is where I wanted to come in, but it's been covered.
Thank you.
I don't feel I've had some of my questions answered.
Do you not?
No.
Right. Sarah.
Thank you. So just to add, in terms of the quarterly performance report, that is the highest level set of indicators that will feature in that quarterly report. Obviously, below that, services will each have their set of service performance indicators and measures, and we'll be regularly reviewing those. So it's only some that we pull up into the overarching corporate report, whereas services will have and hold more details. If I took planning as an example, they will have a whole suite of service indicators that they are looking at. Whereas only some of those will be pulled up into the overarching corporate report. So to take your example of government grant funding, that could either in practice look like a particular service level in terms of a service indicator, or a particular project or programme, because obviously projects and programmes are our vehicle for delivering a lot of our change and improvement. And you've made me think what we should probably have here is it's not just about directorate meetings, it is programme boards where that can happen as well, where we review the progress of our programmes. So I don't know if that's helpful in terms of sort of the different layers and what the overarching quarterly report pulls up. But it's also absolutely why we've got the separate scrutinies and the arrow directly in from those directorate meetings, because there will be specific areas of performance reported into the specific scrutinies on a needs basis, based on those forward work plans and agreements as well. In terms of workforce, so I will again, as per the earlier point, feed that back into the conversation this Friday. In terms of, I think it was financial sustainability, and how does the financial reporting sit alongside the performance. So as Liz said, whilst they're going to come quarterly to the same meetings, actually what we haven't got currently in our overarching performance report is indicators that would give us something in terms of the organisational health and financial sustainability. So it's something we could look at how we join that up as well.
Alan wanted to come in as well, if that's all right.
Yeah, I think my question is just, there will be overlap potentially then with what the role of audit in some of their functions there. They are set to deal with, and I'm still trying to get clear in my head, where this sits with audit, I suppose.
Alan may now answer that.
So I think the definition around the ownership of the key risks for the organisation. They would sit with audit as part of those key areas of performance. But just to your earlier point around some of those other indicators that you might want to see, for example, your statement was, I'm interested in workforce, I'm interested in some of those pressures. That's exactly the sort of thing that I would expect maybe a scrutiny workshop could debate, so you can inform the scope of that performance report. So if there's something that you as scrutiny believe should be in those performance indicators, that's the purpose of the debate, and then make those recommendations to executives, so that if there's something that you think is important to the organisation in terms of its health or risks, or the key things are important to you as members, let's see those moving forward. The best example I can use is planning. So as you know, members, that's a key issue for you all and a key issue for communities, and yet our performance report reports that as green, because of the way, absolutely, the performance report clearly states that planning performance is green based upon the indicators that are currently being used, which are based upon a national set. What this process enables you to do is debate and consider what other things would you really like to know under the skin of that performance to really get under the elements of that. And it's quite clear, isn't it, that we do have an issue within that service and potentially others as well. And that ability to have those bespoke or augment the way in which we're testing that, to make sure that members are cited and it represents what's actually going on the ground, but also gives you the ability to say, oh, hang on a second, that's not my experience. This is what I'm experiencing. Is there a way in which we can measure that? So not looking for the measurement necessarily, but just raising the issue gives the team the pointers about how they can then develop that.
So just as a really quick example, the delivery of something like the bus service improvement figures and delivery of the bus station in Taunton, how will that get measured in terms of this report? You know, it's been a long time delivering something, and those are the sort of things that we as councillors get very little information on. And for me, something in that performance report would be really helpful, that somehow showed where the deliveries of government schemes, government fundings, you know, it's the same thing. It's about where are we at tracking with those things that are in the process, but we as councillors potentially get frustrated because we're not seeing them on the ground. It's picking up where those things are within the organisation.
So really briefly, Chair, that's exactly what I would expect to see as part of that feedback from scrutiny, to be able to kind of look at those particular issues. And if that's something that's ultimately adopted, then we get the opportunity to report it, because all those things are happening. How do we bring them to life within the performance report, but also make the performance report quite manageable? And it might be that there's a top line of indicators that talk about organisational health and some of those key deliverables. Members have the ability to dive into that detail potentially, and the team have been working on that using the new management software, so you can get those updates if you want them. But if that's something that you want to deep dive into, delivery of capital infrastructure projects, for example, that could be a matter of performance that you could workshop and consider that particular detail, so you are seeing those types of indicators come through. So I can't answer the question directly, but if it's something you want to see, let's have that discussion, debate, and see if we can bring it up.
Thank you very much.
Right, I've got Councillor Cravis who wishes to speak, and then Councillor Filmer and Sieb wish to come back. So, Marcus.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be brief. I'm conscious of time. It was actually just what Owen just said then. In that case, as we're in a scrutiny, can I add it now? I'm looking at, as a councillor, we'll get sometimes, if you get complaints, you might get people ring you up because they, feel that, they have a complaint, or there's something they need help with, and therefore is that a performance issue. But actually, how do we find that information? Because yes, you could get feedback from parish councillors, you get feedback from, and I notice here about feedback from people who's phoned in. What about those people who haven't phoned in and actually have got an issue? And how do we go out and find the problems how do we go and find the unknowns that we don't know about? And how do we find the issues with someone who's, I don't know, I don't want to use the word housing, but how do you find an issue there if they haven't contacted their local councillor? Because obviously not everybody's, I don't want to use the word brave enough to contact their local councillor, but it happens a lot where people don't know what to do, genuinely don't know what to do. Okay. And how do we go out and find those?
The unknown unknowns.
Yeah, the unknown unknowns to performance, yes. Keeping it within the agenda item.
Okay.
And just one quick question while we're in a meeting is, bus station in Taunton, we're just like a bus service from Minor to Bridgewater, let alone a station.
A bus?
They could just check us on the street once we get there. We don't mind.
What is a bus? Councillor Lation.
I just wanted to mention the work we've done in the past on resident survey and work that might be done in the future, and whether that might be extended more widely, because working that way, we go out to people instead of waiting for them to come to us. So I think that's something that we need to look at most definitely. I know that the communications team led by Peter Elliott are already working on the possibilities that we have there.
Thank you. We'll lodge that one there, and then if we may, Marcus, thank you for that. Councillor Filmer.
Thank you, Chair. It was really coming back to Councillor Hobhous's question in terms of the order in which we deal with scrutiny and executive. I think the only thing I was going to say is ultimately, if we go this route, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating when we see how it works. My concern I wanted to raise was, I think sometimes we underestimate the impact that scrutiny currently has. So we don't always make formal recommendations as to what executive should do. And it's credit to the executive members who come to this meeting. They hear the debate that's gone on at scrutiny, and they often pick up on things that we've raised and take them into executive and act on them. So it's a quiet power rather than us beating people over the head. And I think the danger we have, having seen how it worked in the past with the budget meetings, when they used to be the other way around, they went to executive first and then came to scrutiny. Basically, we spent our entire time beating the executive over the head over things they'd done or not done, and it wasn't particularly constructive. Whereas I think the way it has worked subsequently of having that feeding into executive has been a much more constructive and positive process than otherwise. So it just worries me that we might go back to that old regime of executive have or haven't done this, let's tell them off about it, rather than feeding in.
I think what I've been hearing most over the last few months is that what we need to do is to make sure that we feed into the executive earlier, and that it shouldn't be left until the executive paper is essentially a fait accompli, at which point there are limited means for the scrutiny committees to be able to influence the outcomes. Councillor Seeb.
Thank you, Chair. One of the things I thoroughly enjoy about being a councillor is working in committee, because sometimes somebody will say something and a number of bricks drop, and you realise there's something to raise that may be pertinent. One of the things which has struck me listening to the debate is the council's really set up and constituted to run services. One of those services is running projects, but we're actually around the services, and the performance is around the services. It's about the continuous ongoing things. So I do think that in the performance framework, we need to just bear in mind that point about it. So for example, in planning, we would see cost awards and lost appeals and so on as a symptom of a service that was not running well. In the planning, you might also find threads of something else which I think we've missed in the personnel side of soft targets, is the external environment. You know, the reality is there are plenty of private planning practices, and they've sucked up a lot of good public servants into them, leaving a deficit behind, and that puts pressure on pay. You know, these external factors are things which we need to be mindful of when judging the performance of a service, in order to plan for better performance of that service in the future and long-term sustainability. So it just struck me that we ought to somehow stamp that, you know, this is about running the services, not the projects. So the answer to your question wouldn't necessarily be you'll find out about a particular project and when it's going to deliver. What you'll find out is how good the organisation is at delivering projects and whether there are currently any holes.
Thank you, Councillor Seeb. I think that's been a very useful discussion. I hope Sarah's managed to jot down some of the discussion points. The one thing I would like to emphasise is the point that Scott made, particularly that scrutiny can add value in its overview role for the development of forward years performance indicators. So that, I think, is an important element for us to capture. Otherwise, ladies and gentlemen, that's been really helpful. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah, for the presentation. That was very helpful, and we watch the development of the CPF with interest and hopefully engagement. Thank you. So that brings us, ladies and gentlemen, to the last agenda item 8, which is the the scrutiny work plan 25-26. There are a number of issues on these. You will see, is there anything that anybody particularly wishes to comment on? The one thing I will say on the July meeting forward programme is that we've got the scrutiny review working group update stroke recommendations. We're not quite sure yet whether or not we will be at the point of being able to make recommendations to that meeting, or whether it will still be in updating mode. Nevertheless, the working group is working hard at the moment and is due to meet again in the next 10 days or so to look at a series of draft recommendations, some of which we've touched on this morning already. And some of those recommendations, if we bring them to this committee and they're approved, could be acted on pretty much immediately. Some will probably have to wait for the start of the new municipal year. But just to give everyone the assurance that that working group work is continuing hard, and we hope to be able to bring it to formal presentation sooner rather than later. Yes, Vice Chairman.
It might be that I'm not understanding one of the titles on the report, but we've talked about the broader scope of the LCN. What's it now called? Alan, remind me. It's become a broader review of local engagement, and I'm not sure I'm seeing that on the work programme there.
Local devolution update.
Is that the devolution update? Okay.
Chair, I've just spotted in July, you've got 24-25 budget monitoring draft outturn was what we had today. So that's
We
not
liked it so
needed.
much we wanted again.
Just to say,
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. Yes.
So just to clarify, then a local devolution update to me reads as something very different from what has been talked about, which was a review of local how we interact with local communities, which, and I can't remember the name of it. Sarah Skirton gave a report, a proposal that she was taking to the executive leader team, and it was localities or something like that. That isn't really the same as devolution.
So, Chair, we'll take that away to kind of clarify the scope of that. My understanding was that was wrapped up as part of that general debate, but we'll certainly take it away. And the point is around, to Councillor Johnson's query, there is a view around developing an approach to how we work with localities as part of our transformation plan as well. But clearly there is a need for that LCN review, which members have requested. So let me take that away and make sure there's a timetable for that.
In any event, the October meeting seems to be the one at which we're aiming for those things to be brought back. Okay. Yeah. Councillor Hobhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On August, we have a strategic risk register report. We nowhere have an operational risk register report.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to do the strategic, I think you should do the operational.
Mrs.
Chair, through you, I think we can consider those. What we've done previously is have all the strategic risks reported, but also the high level operational risks. So we can certainly put that together in a report for that review meeting in August.
Thank you, Chair. There has been some communication between me and officers, including Sean Warren, the head of Revenues and Benefits, about a presentation coming to the July meeting about the impact of changes of CTRS, Council Tax Reduction Scheme, and also government changes to employment and support allowance and how that has impacted on households in Somerset. So we were looking at a presentation coming to the 30th of July, but I will have to go back through my emails and find that for you. And I also wondered whether the items under the 26th of November meeting on budget options and Council Tax Reduction Scheme, they will be very far advanced by the end of November. And I wonder whether one of the earlier meetings is more suitable, particularly as we've been talking about better ways of working for scrutiny.
Indeed. So
Chair.
when might that be feasible to bring forward?
Chair, could I take that way as an action to speak to the incoming 151 who starts on Tuesday to talk about the MTFS timetable and make sure some of these reports align to our dates that we're working to? Because I've just spotted September meeting as well has got a HRA report that we've reviewed today as well. So I think the finance papers on here need to be looked at a bit closer in the dates that they're on.
Okay. And is September too early to start looking at some of those budget issues?
No, I think the new 151 wants to bring the first iteration of savings in September.
Yeah.
And then we're also talking about
that would be good.
Reviewing and agreeing fees and charges a lot earlier than we did last year in terms of agreeing those ahead of budget setting.
I mean, obviously September's looking fairly thin at the moment, so the opportunity to have some of those budget considerations looked at the earliest possible stage would be helpful.
Chair, I was just going to question as well the locality work that you've talked about that Sarah, I believe, has already presented to the Executive Leader Scheme. Why is that waiting till October? I mean, this has been a long time in the waiting now. Could that not be in September? Is there a reason why that's not coming forward sooner?
Chair, I've already asked that question. So in this meeting, I've just inquired with what is the timescale for the LCN review. The localities review is a separate, bigger debate, but clearly members have asked for an LCN review. So I'll ask the service to confirm what that's likely to be.
Okay, thank you. Officer Bowen.
Yes, sorry, I just wanted to let Nicola Hicks know that I did get an update from Rebecca with some changes to the schedule, which actually isn't reflected in the one that was published. So actually the latest version I think is correct, but I'll share that with you. All right, so it's slightly different. All right, thank you.
Are there any other comments, please, on the forward plan at this moment? Councillor Lation.
Sorry, Chair, I should have mentioned that we're not expecting to undertake big changes to council tax reduction scheme for 26-27. If we were, we would be consulting this summer, and we're clearly not. We also need time to understand how the changes we have made for the current year impact alongside those changes that government have made.
Thank you very much. If there's nothing else then on the work plan, ladies and gentlemen, I will draw the meeting to a close. Thank you all for attending in person and online. Members will be aware that there is a briefing now that is due to start at 1 o'clock. So we have 2.5 minutes to prepare ourselves for that. So I'll formally declare this meeting closed, but please do feel free to stay on or join online for the briefing. Thank you very much.